Hey everybody, this is JDGaming, back today with a deck profile for Invoked Dogmatika. Obviously, it's not every day that I do a profile on my channel for a deck that's more popular in the metagame, and there's kind of a short, but still personal story for why I'm doing this. Way back in the day when I was testing Psychics in Dev Pro, the previous iteration of EDO Pro or Project Ignis, I actually ran into the mighty threat that is Invoked Mechaba, and although I got royally screwed over by that card, I was awestruck with just how compact and efficient the Invoked engine was. And to give you some context, this was so far back that it was OCG only at the time, and it was still called Eidolon, so been a while since that. Fast forward to this year, and when I finally got Project Ignis in order to go and test things out more recently, I ended up coming across, you guessed it, Dogma Invoked, which of course now we have in the TCG as Dogmatika, but there was something really cool and nostalgic about seeing that same deck again and just being destroyed one more time by another familiar face. So it was kind of weird, right? Losing to the same thing, but at the same time realizing, wow, that same essence, that emotion, that wonder was able to be recaptured in this game. And especially if you have not seen this strategy yet, it's a treat. It's just so cool how these two strategies synergize. They honestly look like they were made for each other. That's how fluid this deck is, and I can't wait to bring this one to you guys. So this is going to be a let's build. As always, I'll go through and explain my choices as I build this deck from the ground up, from zero. So if you've never seen the theme before, you'll be able to kind of get the reasoning for that. I will say, however, as this is a more commonly seen deck, and because there's so many pieces in there with a lot of information, I did go ahead and create an in-depth introduction to Invoked Dogmatika that I'll link in the top right info card there. So be sure to check that video out first if you have not read these cards yet. That will give you all the basics you need in order to jump right into this one for more of a discussion on how to build the deck. So without further ado, let's build Invoked Dogmatika. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supports the theme's goals. Now, I do want to let you know, in case you skipped the introduction, to please check out the info card in the top right-hand corner, where I've done an in-depth introduction to the Invoked Dogmatika theme. That's where I go over a lot of the text-based information on the cards, in case you haven't seen them before, and this deck profile is going to focus a lot more on how do you build the deck and what other nuances do you care about as you're building and playing the strategies. So be warned, make sure you already either know the cards or check out that resource that I have linked there. But otherwise, jumping right in, we're starting off with 3 of our key invoked monster in 𝕗𝗄𝗏 the Invoker. Of course, on play, this lets you go and search your invocation spell, and it has a nice hand trap ability that not only powers up your fusion monster you control by 1,000 attack and defense for the turn, but also lands itself in the graveyard as a free dark monster, which we'll talk about a bit later in this profile. But of course, while it's unrestricted, we're playing 3 copies of the unlimited monster so that we have as good of a chance of opening it as possible. And to continue that trend, we are playing 3 copies of Magical Meltdown, which on activation, of course, lets you search 𝕗𝗏𝗏 as well, and then has a bonus ability that kind of gives blanket protection on your fusion monsters and the spells or other effects that may let you summon them. Now you have 6 copies of 𝕗𝗏𝗏 the Invoker and 1 terraforming. That means we have 7 copies of our main play starter for the Invoked half alone. So you can already see why this deck is so consistent. Invocation itself, I only like playing 2 copies. I know some people like playing 3, but my personal reasoning is with the way this card not only lets you fusion summon, but recycle itself to your deck, and then get that same 𝕗𝗏𝗏 back to your hand, where now, next turn, you could potentially normal summon it and search the same invocation. You end up not really needing the 3rd copy. 2 seem to work out the best for me, and that may be up to preference. You may like 3. Heck, you might like 1, or the format may change and you may be forced to use different numbers. But I kind of like 2 in this case because of how redundant it becomes when you're recycling the invocation package. So once you normal summon your 𝕗𝗏𝗏 the Invoker, of course lets you search your invocation and gets your plays going, but to make the deck a little more self-sufficient, it is important to realize this is a normal summoned 1,000 attack monster, so we can of course turn that into our Salamangreat Almiraj, which has other abilities, but main purpose is link summoning this, and then turning that into our Secure Gardener, which needs a Cyberse Link monster, which Almiraj is. Bring out a light monster, you can now fuse Invoker into Mechaba here, and then this is the main thing you want to have as our starting point. It'll make any board we have a lot stronger because it can banish and negate things without destroying, and because you're able to recycle 𝕗𝗏𝗏 the Invoker, you're able to have ammo as a monster card in this very monster-centric environment. Now that we've talked about the invoked part, it's time to naturally talk about the other half with the Dogmatika, and we're starting off with 3 copies of their on-theme Rhoda in Nadir's Servant, which lets you go and at resolution send a monster from your extra deck to the grave and then add a Dogmatika monster or Fallen of Albaz as long as the monster you want to search has attack less than or equal to that of the monster you sent to the graveyard. This does place a restriction along with all the other Dogmatika cards in that you can't special summon from your extra deck for the rest of the turn after this resolves, but again, you can go ahead and do that entire invoked package I talked about. Do those plays before you even play Nadir's Servant. You can only activate one of these per turn, so if you happen to get hit by like Solemn Judgment, great, play your second copy from your hand. It doesn't stop there with its search. Much like how our invoked engine had a lot of ways to search its key pieces and ended up with 7 cards, we now have 3 copies of 𝗗𝗲𝗄 the Virtuous, which is the main monster we will often search with Nadir's Servant. If it is summoned, normal or special, you're able to search a Dogmatika card. Doesn't even have to be a monster. As long as it's not named 𝗗𝗲𝗄, it is fair game. Add that from your deck to your hand. It has a bonus effect that lets you special summon her once per turn as long as there is any monster anywhere on the field that was special summoned from the extra deck. Could be one of your opponent's monsters, but it could also be you summoned your Invoked Mechaba. Now you drop this card for free, and you can see where the synergies start happening here. If you get that Mechaba as already a strong form of negation, now you can bring out your 𝗗𝗲𝗄, search another piece that often ends up in further negation. She's a very powerful asset for that reason. So with between Nadir's Servant and the 𝗗𝗲𝗄, we now have 6 ways to start these plays as well, plus the 7 ways to start the invoked engine, and you can see you have 13 ways to get your deck going. Pretty solid numbers, and that's why this deck is so consistent. She does also carry an ability that again restricts you into not being able to play from your extra deck the turn we resolve that effect successfully, but she does have a bonus that says if she's attacked or attacks into a monster special summon from the extra deck, she won't die, although you take damage just like normal. So interesting to note. You're not really relying on that necessarily, but it is a nice little bonus in making sure that your already good investment of bringing this to the field, searching another card, sticks around and can do as much as possible. Now, what you search with 𝗗𝗲𝗄, there's probably 3 good options right now at the time of making this video, and some of these are better than others depending on how you're playing and when you're playing. But I do want to talk first about the 1 copy I like teching of Dogmatika Maximus. This thing will let you go ahead and banish that Almirage you got into your graveyard with the previous invoked play to special this guy right to the field. It's got 1500 attack and 3000 defense, and then with an ignition effect, you can go ahead and send 2 cards from your extra deck to the graveyard like these guys here in order to force your opponent to do the same. Now, that could backfire, so it depends on how common is the Dogmatika mirror match and other decks that may take advantage of sending their cards from their extra deck to the graveyard, because do remember, your opponent's not restricted like you are. You have to choose 2 different names. Your opponent could just choose 2 of like a Herald of the Arclight and fetch an entire ritual summon for all I know. But I think this is extremely powerful to have access to in your toolbox, because if you use Maximus and send these 2, you will resolve both of their effects. So Titanic-clad the Ash Dragon, we're not playing Fallen of Albaz for, so ignore all of its on-field effects and stats. All we care about is 2500 attack in case you send it off of Nadir's Servant or Punishment that we'll talk about later. If this card was sent to the graveyard during the end phase, you could basically Skarm search for any Dogmatika card and have a free Maximus effectively. On top of that, you could go ahead and use 𝕿𝖄𝗇𝑑 because if she's sent to the graveyard, search your 𝗗𝗷𝗄 Schism. Then you have to discard a card from your hand of your choice, but often that frees you up for bigger plays, especially because 𝗗𝗷𝗄 Schism is a card that says during either player's main phase, once per turn you can fusion summon a 𝗗𝗷 monster using cards that you control or that are in your graveyard. So that means you can use 𝗵𝗄𝗠 in addition to maybe that Titanic-clad after it's gotten its search. Maybe you use an Alistair the Invoker that you can send to the graveyard with its quick effect. Either way, if you use a dark monster, you could summon Winda, and then on top of that, 𝗗𝗷 Schism lets you, without targeting, send a monster of the matching attribute to the one you just summoned from field to graveyard, and that's a good way to remove annoying threats as well. Plus, if you summon Winda early enough, you probably won the game, and that's why I really can't overstate the power of Maximus. If this card is not going to screw you over, I say go ahead and play it, because it's just so powerful in what's able to do. You're able to cheat another free search, which means basically free body on board, and you get this 𝗗𝗷 Schism play set up for basically no reason. 2 copies of Dogmatika Fleur de Lis, the Knighted. This thing is basically a big body that comes on the the field as long as somebody has a monster summoned from the extra deck. You could drop it during either main phase, and then if you control another Dogmatika card, which you probably have either Maximus or �11𝗍, if not both, blank one of your opponent's effect monster's abilities for the entire turn. That's really powerful because, again, doesn't target, plus the fact that this has 2500 attack and defense is even better because if this thing's on your field, once per turn when your Dogmatika monster attacks, you can have all of your Dogmatika monsters receive a 500 attack power boost that's permanent. So this thing goes up to a mighty 3000. Both Maximus and �11𝗍 go up to 2000, which is nothing to sneeze at versus their 1500. This thing just helps you win games, and that's why I like playing 2 copies. I've seen some lists where people like playing like 1 of this, and maybe if you want a smaller package, you could do that, but I just feel even with this being a once per turn summon and negate, it's basically the main reason you want to play this strategy is the consistency of Nadir Servant and �11𝗍 combined with this end piece that actually lets you do something meaningful with those searches. This next card could honestly be seen as another card you search off of �11𝗍 and kind of go in the previous section of core for the Dogmatika theme, but I think of it more as the glue that holds the standard build of Dogmatika that I've talked about thus far with kind of the weird direction I've taken this, and that's going to be 2 copies of Dogmatika Punishment. This normal trap card lets you target a face-up monster your opponent controls, then at resolution, send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, kind of like Nadir Servant, and it's able to destroy that monster if you chose the monster with attack greater than or equal to that monster. You can cheat it instead of it being a 1-for-1 removal that puts a huge, harsh lockdown on yourself. You, of course, play it with 1 copy of Elder Entity Nutos. This thing, of course, if it's sent to the graveyard, lets you target a card on the field in a new chain and destroy it, and that doesn't even have to be a monster. It could be a spell or trap, so basically, as long as you have Dogmatika Punishment and Nutos at your disposal, you're able to kill 2 of your opponent's cards at any time, as long as they can be targeted, and as long as at least one of them is a monster with 2500 or less attack, which is pretty much always going to be the case if you're killing like a Link monster or something along those lines. Do remember also, Punishment is going to be a once per turn activation effect, so if you do get stopped, much like Nadir Servant, you can go ahead and use further copies as well. And the Nutos does have other utility as being a light fusion monster in this deck. There's a lot of ways that you can leverage those attributes, typing, and all that kind of stuff there. But this is kind of where we get into the fun part of the deck. This is where people would normally play Pot of Desires, and I do think that's a good idea because it gets you a lot of consistency. Nothing is restricted in this deck, so Pot of Desires is a real possibility here. You just search the Schism before you do anything with Desires anyway, and it makes sure you're unbricked as much as possible, but I found it clashed with this card that I really wanted to play right now, just based on the format. So Trap Trick is a normal trap that says banish a normal trap from your deck except Trap Trick and set a card with the same name directly from your deck, and that card can be activated this turn. You can only activate 1 trap card for the rest of the turn, and this card can only be activated once per turn. So again, if Trap Trick gets negated, you could play another copy if you still have it because you don't even banish cards for its ability until resolution, so you don't really lose anything by playing the first copy. But effectively what this does is, by playing 2 copies of Dogmatika Punishment, you've now turned it into 5 copies that you can access at any time, and of course you want to use all your other back row first, but when you're able to kill 2 more cards out of nowhere with Punishment, Trap Trick is going to give you a huge boost, and this leads, of course, to other decisions for our main and side deck as well. So when we have Trap Trick in our deck, it's possible to play tech like Ice Dragon's Prison. This card is one of my new favorites from Rise of the Duelist. I'm so glad it's seeing play and getting attention because I feel like it really deserved it. It says target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field and negate its effects. Then you can banish 1 monster from both players' fields without targeting that have the same type as each other. Again, you can only activate 1 per turn, so same deal. You could play subsequent copies if you happen to draw into multiples, but whole point of this is now, if you use this against a mirror match or any other mono type deck, obviously it's going to be useful there because you could just get rid of any monster that your opponent has in their grave and on their field. But what's really cool is everyone's trying to play Predaplant Verte Anaconda in order to summon Dragoon, and that's a spellcaster that you have to summon off of Dark Magician, which is also a spellcaster. So lo and behold, as long as you can bait out the Dragoon effect, you play this card or Trap Trick to access this card, summon Dark Magician, banish both, doesn't target, doesn't destroy, it gets rid of the problem. And that's why I think this card is so powerful right now, in addition to it being good in general against normal Yu-Gi-Oh decks that play the same type, it happens to be really good against one of the most oppressive and powerful cards in today's game. Of course, you're going to be able to play things like Infinite Impermanence a bit more to its fullest potential, because not only is this now going to be a hand trap for you, but you're able to set it into your column and then blank spells and traps into the column that it's placed in, even with Trap Trick. Just remember, this is something I learned very early on while experimenting with this deck. Let's say you have this middle zone, you activate Infinite Impermanence, it's going to affect the entire column for the whole turn, including this zone that Impermanence was in. So if you were to happen to be like, oh yeah, I'll activate my Trap Trick and set the Ice Dragon's Prison here, you just blanked your own card. So make sure you don't do that. It's an easy thing to miss. It's a really weird feeling if you haven't played a ton with Trap Trick and Infinite Impermanence, but it does come up. So I do want to bring that up to you guys. So hopefully it saves you some trouble during some of your games. And then the last normal trap I like playing, just to round things out, is a couple copies of Compulsory Evacuation Device. I found sometimes you just fight against things that you can't Ice Dragon's Prison, and so Compulse, yes, it still targets, but you're able to get rid of anything even after the fact. That flexibility is just so powerful in making sure the Trap Trick package doesn't feel dead. Playing 2 copies, of course, is basically 5 copies in this deck. One really cool thing about all of this is the fact that it synergizes so darn well with, honestly, one of my favorite cards from Rise of the Duelist, Forbidden Droplet. This thing makes it so I don't have to play nearly as many hand traps, if at all, which helps me play around Triple Tactics talent. The way this card is worded, you send for cost cards from your hand or face up on your field, but anything that's currently resolving on the field is technically still on the field. So if you were to have these 3 set, you can go and activate your Compulse, you could chain your Infinite Impermanence, then you can activate Forbidden Droplet after that and send these 2 and no other cards, and basically you've turned both of these 1-for-1 or minus cards into additional negations, and this setup right here can get rid of 4 cards effectively. This is going to help you break through a lot of boards. The fact that it synergizes with trap decks is just a really cool concept to me. If you are playing all the traps especially, I do think Solemn Judgment is really good. Obviously it helps ward off Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm in games 2 and 3, but it's also just a generically good stopper for literally anything that's not a monster effect. When you combine this with the Mechaba you're summoning every game, it's going to be a big pain in the butt for your opponent to deal with. I pretty much figured I'm going to play it in the side at the very least, but I kind of like it in the main, and it works out for me. Now, the last card in the main deck is going to be 3 copies of Super Polymerization, and with Dragoon being everywhere, I think it's very viable. You're able to go and turn that Anaconda and Dragoon into one of these monsters because they're both dark, and they are a fusion and a dark monster. The fact that Anaconda says you can't summon for the rest of their turn after resolving that ability basically means the monsters are a sitting duck. Which you choose depends on the situation. This is a huge board wipe monster that can do tons of damage, and this thing is more of a precise snipe one card by blanking it. And don't forget, it's a continuous ability that prevents activations of cards that have predator counters, but you place one every turn, so you could potentially seal off lots of cards with that one for whatever reason if he stays on the board. I do still play the Mud Dragon of the Swamp because obviously you don't want to just stop that. Use any 2 monsters with the same attribute with different types. Lots of cards in the extra deck fit that category as well, so it ends up being a pretty useful general thing. Obviously, none of these are new. I just think it's worth considering Super Poly right now because Dragoon is everywhere, and this helps you make it so you're not really afraid of that card, which is an amazing thing to say about such a threatening monster. Just to finish up here, I have 5 monsters in the extra deck. 𝕿𝖃𝗷 Construct is just the light monster you can easily summon with that Schism, since you're playing light monsters anyway with your Dogmatika. The second copy of Invoked Mechaba, don't forget this is a soft once per turn, so each copy can use its effect as long as you have discards to pay for them. Third copies never come up for me, games don't go that long, but second copy definitely has from time to time. Purgatrio, because this thing is a fire monster that you can use off of Almirage. It's just a big beater that can pierce through multiple monsters and just attack everything. Invoked Caliga is going to simplify the game in your favor because when you have things like Solemn Judgment, Mechaba, and you're restricting your opponent's options, it's awesome having Caliga to make your opponent get 1 attempt at an activation. Even the Fleur de Lis can just come out from your hand, blank the 1 monster they tried to use its effect, and then Caliga says, okay, you can't do anything else for the rest of the turn. And then the last card is the new Invoked Ogeiades. This thing is a very cool monster if you haven't read it already. Requires a fusion monster in addition to Alistair the Invoker, and it reminds me a lot of Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, because when it's played or when your opponent special summons a monster to their board, target one of their monsters and destroy it, which is nice spot removal and kind of puts your opponent on their toes, backs them up into a corner a bit if they're behind and have to make their monsters stick. He starts off with 2000 attack, but you can banish any fusion monster from your graveyard, so it could even be like 𝗵𝗍𝗃, could be like 𝗵𝗗𝗰 or something. Whatever the case may be, get rid of a fallen fusion monster, and you're able to attack pump this guy by the same amount as that monster's attack. So all of a sudden, this thing's over 4,000 damage. You just cleared the way for it to attack by getting rid of a monster, and so you can do the push for game out of nowhere with this card. And with that, we've successfully built our Invoked Dogmatika deck from zero. Let me know what you think about the deck down below, and big thanks to anyone who watched the whole video. I know even with the chapter system, this is a bit of a long haul, but hopefully you got something good out of it, and don't forget to subscribe if you did so you can see the next video that I do in this kind of a format. We'll start off with the main deck here with 3 copies of Alistair the Invoker. We have 3 copies of Dogmatika 𝗵𝗄𝗃 the Virtuous. We have double Dogmatika 𝗵𝗄𝗊𝗓𝗙 the Knighted, and 1 copy of Dogmatika Maximus. And that's actually it for the monsters. A pretty slim count there. We're going on to the spells now with triple Forbidden Droplet. Then we have double Invocation, triple Magical Meltdown. We got triple Nadir's Servant, triple Super Polymerization, 1 Terraforming, and then for our trap cards, we have our double Compulsory Evacuation Device, double Dogmatika Punishment, double Ice Dragon's Prison, triple Infinite Impermanence, then we have our lone Shadal's Schism, and triple Solemn Judgment, and then triple Trap Trick for kind of the spicy way to play this deck. For again, 40 cards in the main, and then for our extra deck, 15 of course, we have 1 copy of 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝑑𝗊𝖓𝗏, Winda, and Construct. Then we have our Invoked Caliga, our Purgatrio, and Ogyades, and then we have double copy of Invoked Mechaba, then we have Elder Entity Nutos, we have 𝗍𝗏𝗃 the Ash Dragon, Mud Dragon of the Swamp, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, Predaplant 𝕮𝖔𝖓𝗍𝗍, and then our link ones are Salamangreat Almirage and Secure Gardener. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.